Hello, everybody. It is day 4 in ELA Live, and I am very excited to welcome you to tonight's workshop on how to pinpoint the source of most reading problems in just 5 minutes. That's right. For tonight's ELA day number 4, ELA Live, I, Marnie Ginsberg from readingsimplified.com, am going to bring you some secrets that are not well known, but that make a huge difference for the classroom teacher, and frankly, the classroom teacher of almost any age. So if you are here already, please let me know, what do you teach, or whom do you teach? What grade or grades? We probably have a good chunk of elementary teachers, but also ELA Live, part of this series, is bringing in a lot of middle school and high school teachers. And this information, oddly enough, is actually applicable to pretty much anyone who teaches reading or English to kids of all ages. So I'm excited to hear who's here and to meet your needs so that you can discover how pretty much one test can uncover a lot of the problems that your students are facing as readers, and then you can know better how to meet their needs. So Aubrey, you're teaching 6 through 8. Excellent. That's quite a diverse range. I actually started out as a 6th grade teacher, and when my 6th grade students couldn't read well and I didn't know how to solve the problem, that led me to a path of coming to where I am today with the Reading Simplified. After tutoring privately, searching high and low, getting my doctorate, doing university research, and lots of staff development, I've come to realize that there's a streamlined way to teach reading, and that's what Reading Simplified is. And through that experience, I've discovered over and over again that one test in particular is missing from our typical English language arts classrooms. And when we have that information, it really changes our perspective on what a student needs. So I'm going to share that with you tonight. So Erin says she teaches special ed in high school. Excellent. And you do pretty much everything else. Wow, you got your hands full. And Aubrey, yeah, you said it's terrifying to teach that many kids. All right, so if you're just popping in, let us know who you teach. You know, at an English language arts, I should really know, am I saying who or whom? So that's a quiz for all of you. Hi, Heather, I'm glad you're here. Glad to see you. So let me know what you teach or which grade you teach, and we will get started on this topic of pinpointing the source of most reading problems in just 5 minutes. So I'm going to be talking particularly about one test that is that every teacher, whether they're a first grade teacher or a 12th grade teacher, they could probably benefit from. And Bobby says she teaches first grade. Great. Angela, 5 through 7-year-olds. Okay, so we've got a diverse range, but have no fear. This information really is applicable to all those ages. And I know this partly from personal experience because I've tutored so many kids, beginning readers, struggling readers, dyslexic readers, children with learning disabilities, children with Asperger's or traumatic brain injuries. So I've tutored the gamut, including adults. So this information, I keep finding this secret to be true over and over again. That's why I want to get this out there. Okay, so let's dive in. And if you're just popping in, let us know what grades you teach. And so I'll move along with our presentation if I can get the cursor to move. Okay, let's see. Oh, there we go. So we are in the midst of a pretty clever thing that Betsy Potash has done called ELA Live, and we are 15 different English language arts teachers and bloggers and curriculum developers who are putting on professional development every night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, like right now, and we're in night 4. So if you go to this website, readingsimplified.com, and at this address, you'll find the list of the other teachers who are coming in the days after us. So tomorrow night, it's Saturday night, but don't just have lots of fun with your family. Also save a little time to have fun thinking about English language arts with English Oh My. She's going to be teaching about how to teach students to elaborate on their thinking. So let's not miss out on that. And then we have a host of other great topics all through the August 15th at this same time. So I'm excited to be part of this community, and I hope that we can learn a lot from one another. I've already learned a lot from the previous 3 nights, and I'm really honored to be a part of this. Yes, Emily, thank you. So a little secret about how Facebook Live works. If you guys give likes or loves or laughter, then Facebook sends this out so more teachers like yourself can get this information. So anything you hear that you like, please probably comment more than you might naturally so that Facebook knows, hey, people think this is good stuff. And it's maybe better than watching something about the Kardashians. People might learn something here. Okay. And Donnie asks, can this be saved? Yes, this will be on my Reading Simplified website. So the Facebook page for Reading Simplified. So you can find that after this is over. And Kristen, she teaches special ed, right? Welcome. I'm so glad you're here, Kristen. Thanks for cheering us on. And you might get some upper elementary. Okay, so all of this is applicable. So whether you are a first grade teacher or you are high school special education teacher, what reading assessments do you have access to? And if you're a special education teacher, you may have a lot of them. But what's your main one? So if you're a 6th grade teacher, what's the main reading assessment that your students take? Everybody type that in, because it's going to be interesting to see the diversity, but also see some commonalities, I believe. And so great, Albert, thanks for sharing this with a friend. Please let me know which reading assessments that do you have. What are you using in your classroom, or what is your school or district giving you access to? What kinds of information about reading? So when I was first teaching in the public schools in the late 90s, that's what got me set on this mission to being so passionate about reading. My only information was the end of grade test scores in North Carolina. And so I knew whether a child was a 4 or a 3 or a 2. And that was the main information that I had at that time. So Aubrey says she has the dibbles, but only up to the 6th grade. Exactly. Then what do you do when you're in the 7th grade? And then they take a standardized test at the end of the year, but that's it. Right. That's a very common pattern. Okay, Heather does the NWEA, like the MAPS test probably. And Erin says the Fountains and Pinnell, but she prefers the QRI. Oh, and you did it. Oh, good. Yes, that's a really strong informal reading inventory. So that gives you a little bit more information than your typical reading assessment. Great. What other assessments do you guys have? I bet there's a few others out there. Maybe some of your schools will give you the Iowa or the California Achievement Test, or some other kind of paper and pencil bubble sheet type of test, or the STAR reading test from the people who put out Accelerated Reader. Oh yeah, okay, Erin says, yep, she uses STAR. Okay, so all of those pieces of information are helpful, and it's good. We definitely need to know whether our kids are on grade level or behind. But I ask you this, do these assessments tell you what your students' reading challenges are? Okay, Debbie, you used the maze. I'm not, is that part of the dibbles? I don't know that one. But Bobby uses the dibbles, that's great. Do these assessments tell you what your students' reading challenges are? For instance, if you know from the STAR that a 6th grade student is reading like a 5th grader in the first month, you get the score back of 5.1. Then you ask yourself, okay, what does that tell me the student's problems are? I might know which text to match for that student, which is really helpful. In fact, my first year, I didn't even know that information. So getting that is gold. But still, what else does that student need? There's a host of things that student may or may not need. So what do you guys find? Do you find that if you have an end of year comprehension assessment, that tells you what the student's problems are? And Aubrey says, no, she really dislikes dibbles because it doesn't really tell me what they are comprehending or what they can do related to the standards. Okay, so it's you're looking probably at the oral reading fluency measure, and that does tell you what their reading rate and how they compare with others, but then what are their comprehension skills or what are their decoding skills? It may not be that simple or that clear, particularly in the upper grade levels. Dibbles is better with decoding in the early grade levels. So what do you guys think? Do these assessments answer your questions about what students need? Well, I have found that most end of year or outcome based or comprehension measures, they they leave us with a missing assessment piece. So unless you have a more comprehensive battery or a more comprehensive portfolio to pull from, then we are missing some critical information, particularly in middle school and high school and upper elementary, but sometimes even in the early elementary. A comprehension test alone leaves us kind of hanging. Now, Erin says the QRI gives her the most info. Yeah, because it really does a lot of subtests. That's really good, Erin, that you have access to that. But if you just have access to a comprehension test, you probably don't have an answer as to what the student's problems are or what students' problems are. You know where they fall as compared to other readers on reading overall, but you don't know the specifics about their needs. So you are kind of flying blind. You're kind of like a doctor when you just have a comprehension test or an end of year or an outcome-based type of measure. You're kind of like a doctor who might know, okay, there's a fever. But then the doctor doesn't ask any other questions. The doctor doesn't know anything else. And then that doctor goes and prescribes an antibiotic. Is that a good choice? Should that doctor be prescribing an antibiotic if the doctor only knows that the patient has a fever? Well, the patient might have a fever because of a bacteria, maybe an ear infection, so an antibiotic of a certain type might work. But the patient might have a fever because of some sort of virus and the antibiotic won't work. Or the patient may have a fever because there is some sort of cut and there's an external inflammation, and an internal antibiotic is a very inefficient way if it works at all, I don't know. Or this patient may have some sort of advanced kind of severe disease, and the fever is just one of the really bad signs. And so that kind of global measure, an umbrella measure without the details, doesn't give the doctor a good direction for that patient. And so that's what a lot of these comprehension tests are doing for us as well. I like having them. At one point I didn't have them at all. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying they may not be sufficient to figuring out what our students really need. Let's see if I can advance my slide. And surprisingly, what I find over and over again after 20 years of working with students myself and working with teachers who are working with students is that the most important reading test that tells me, I should say the most important test that's missing, that tells me where the problems are, is a nonsense word decoding test. And I know that may be very surprising and unexpected for many of us, but please open your minds and hear me out, okay? Because this is real experience and it's also based in research. So let me tell you a little bit more. If you don't know what I mean by a nonsense word test, I mean a non-word test where the words are made up and the student has to read them as if they were real words. So the student would look at this and say saff and mott and mant and sauced. Okay, thanks for the thumbs up, you guys. That's good to hear. So nonsense word tests, they reveal the student's sound symbol decoding abilities. Any other test doesn't really get down to their foundational decoding skills, and that skill base or that foundation, whether it's there or whether it's kind of like a sieve, is what everything else in reading is built upon. And when that foundation is weak, then the house is crumbly. Okay, so a nonsense word test can take just maybe a minute or two or three, but then it can zero in on, oh, this is really a problem for my student. I've been worried about comprehension. I've been worried about vocabulary, but really those may be good and I certainly need to think about them. But what is much more important for the student is that decoding, that sound-based decoding. And this is not just my idea. How many of you have heard of Keith Stanovich? He's a reading researcher who was very well known for coming up with the Matthew effects in reading. He popularized that term to talk about how early readers who are successful, they are just like the parable in the Gospel of Matthew where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. If you start out really well in early reading, you accelerate and you have like a positive snowball. And that has had a huge impact in the field of reading, as have some other of his findings. How many of you have heard of Keith Stanovich? And so what he says is that the speed of naming pronounceable non-words is one of the tasks that most clearly differentiates good from poor readers. So that non-word ability shows you who's good and who's not at reading. So it must be a significant test. And he says there's incredible potency of pseudo word or fake word reading as a predictor of reading difficulty. And yet, how many of us are, especially after we get out of the second grade and beyond, how many of us have access to tests of nonsense word reading or pseudo word reading? I never did when I was teaching in the middle school, as part of the school or the district resources. And Aaron says that nonsense word tests test true decoding, not just sight words. Very true. Sight words are still important, absolutely, but nonsense words tests can give you more info about decoding skills, totally. The decoding is the basis on which we build that sight word knowledge, and a lot of kids can do a lot of amazing things with sight word knowledge with a very shaky decoding base, but after a while it starts to become too much for them. So Stanovich finds this, and I also find it, like I said, over and over again. I've taught hundreds of kids, beginning readers and struggling readers. And just recently I had 2 students that kind of blew me away with how profound this lesson was for them. So I'm going to tell you about this 4th grade girl. She came to me because her teacher thought she had some comprehension difficulties. Her mother was concerned that she was not performing quite as well as she would have liked. And yet the student was scoring on a map or a standardized test of reading at the 86th percentile. So she was well above average, and yet there were some things going on in the classroom that were confusing the teacher, and the mother thought that there were holes in writing particularly, and in not really, the student wasn't interested in reading. And so I did these tests right here to get started and to figure out what was the student's need. And shockingly, she was reading at the 8th grade level on the Bader Informal Reading Inventory. And similarly, pretty close to that, the 7th grade point for the 4th month on the Woodcock-Johnson Reading Mastery for the passage comprehension. So either test, she's in the mid to 7th grade to 8th grade level for comprehension, even though she's just a 4th grader. And yet the teacher's still finding some comprehension problems, and there's something missing with her classroom performance. But then look at her word identification. It was actually below her current grade level because this was a late spring test. She was reading like a 4th grader in the 2nd month in word identification, and her spelling was even worse. So, this is the kicker. Guess what her word attack was, her nonsense word reading ability. Do you think it was higher than the word identification or lower? I don't know how long the lag is. I don't know how long to wait for you guys. Where is her word attack? She's performing up here like an 8th grader. This is just guess, just for fun. I mean, there's no way you'd know. She's a 4th grader, but her word ID is slightly lower, and Samantha thinks it's even lower, and in fact it is. Look at how low it was. This 4th grader, her nonsense word reading ability was like a 2nd grader at the beginning of the year, right, Aaron? And Heather, you all got it. It was a shocking gap. In fact, to me, it's very rare that a student can perform this high 8th grade comprehension, 2nd grade word attack. And this was really the source of the problem. Remember, we talked about how this, if you don't have a strong sound symbol based decoding system, it's like a sieve. There's things that are going to go missing. So even though she was performing really well and above her ability, there were some strains and there were things that were holding her back. So what we did once we found out, the real hole here is nonsense word is sound symbol decoding. Yeah, Samantha, it is an oddity, but it's not unusual. The gap is very high, but the pattern is the same. I usually see this pattern over and over again. Comprehension and or word ID are up here, but word attack or nonsense word reading is lower. So we spent time working on her sound symbol decoding. We did a couple of activities, which I teach here at Reading Simplified: switch it, sort it, read it. We read text that was challenging. And just after 6 hours of instruction with me, plus some homework reading with her mom, her word attack went from the 2nd grade at the beginning of the year to 3rd grade 8th month. So almost 2 years growth. So we were obviously addressing something that needed to be addressed. Her word ID went up 7 months. Her passage comprehension, this is really interesting to me, that remember the Woodcock-Johnson was a 7.4 and it went up to an 8.5. So even though I had diagnosed that sound-based decoding was the problem, there was still something that was holding her, that was still related to her ultimate outcome of comprehension. And so that was a huge bump for her. Over a year's growth in her passage comprehension, as indicated by the Woodcock-Johnson, she also went up a lot in her phonics knowledge. So and then we continued to work for a few more hours across several more weeks, and writing got easier. The teacher's concerns were kind of dissipated. Her scores went up in the maps. She started reading more. So there was this hole that she compensated for in an amazing way. But if someone had tested her in word attack when she was in third grade or fourth grade, or second grade or third grade or fourth grade, they may have figured out, oh, that's not really a comprehension problem, because actually she's doing stunningly well with what base foundation she had. But so that's one example of how the nonsense word reading test really helps out. And yes, Aubrey, back to your question, you can use definitely larger and larger words for the middle school kids, nonsense words to diagnose their issue. And the free thing that I'm offering on my website will include longer words. So, okay, that's a fourth grader. What about a high schooler? So I just started working with a 15-year-old boy late spring, and he had been diagnosed with dyslexia just recently. He'd been kind of struggling in school for many years. But look at his nonsense word decoding. That is actually kind of the classic definition of decoding. He was like a first grader at the 8th month, even though he's in the middle of the freshman year. What a huge gap. But his word identification was doing a little bit better. He was like the 37th percentile. That's definitely below average, but it was better than 1.8, which would have been really low. And his reading rate was also low average, probably under that 37 mark. These were all tests that a psychologist did. And so I did the same thing. If nonsense word reading is a problem, then we need to address the sound-based decoding system that the student has. And so let's see if I can get to drum roll, get to what happened afterwards. Where did we go? So again, I did a little midpoint testing before I finished, about what I typically do, about 12 hours of instruction to get kids back to grade level. And even at the midpoint, after 7 hours of one-on-one instruction, he was reading real words at the 70th percentile. So from 37% to 70%. And he had moved up to 140 words per minute, which is really close to the benchmark of 150. And even though he had originally been at the low average, and there was a nonsense word dyslexia test that he got all but one right and did really well on at lexercise.com. That is a resource, a free resource that I'm going to also refer to you in the blog post that I'm going to link later. So those are two case studies that are pretty extreme in the gap, but they represent a pattern that I see over and over again. And also, as I pointed out earlier, reading researchers have found it over and over again that if you want to know how a reader is performing, you can give them a pseudo word reading test or a nonsense word test, and you'll know whether they have a strong sound symbol decoding system, and if they don't, you need to address it. Okay, so after giving you that little sermon on that, the value of that, can you think of students that you have had, or you might have this coming year if you're off for summer? Do you have students who might benefit from nonsense word reading tests? Or can you think of types of students where you felt like they weren't performing quite up to their potential? The way they could talk about ideas, their interest in books didn't quite seem to be up to their ability to write, or maybe not up to their comprehension tests, or there was something missing there. Those are the types of kids that you might want to pull aside and give them a nonsense word reading test. For sure, Erin, you got those kiddos. And I know if you're in middle school or high school, this isn't really part of your curriculum. I was there. What got me kind of started on this pathway to developing Reading Simplified and trying to figure out what is the most streamlined way that we can teach reading. What happened to me was I was a 6th grade language arts teacher with about 85 kids, and I was told that the day before I started my second year in that position that I would be an inclusion teacher, and I had 2 kids who had learning disabilities, and I found out a little later that they couldn't even read at the 1st grade reading level. And I was supposed to be teaching them Adam of the Road and Where the Red Fern Grows and how to write sophisticated 5-paragraph essays, and they could barely understand Dr. Seuss. So I didn't really have the margin to help them very easily. First of all, I didn't know how to teach reading, but also, you know, it wasn't part of my curriculum. So what I did was I just kind of pulled them aside and worked on their, once I figured out a little bit more about how to teach reading, I pulled them aside and tried to do this in the margins, but it is tricky. And Aubrey says she has students who I'm really concerned about whose parents did not want to have them tested at school. Yes. So this might, I have some resources here that aren't, you know, standardized high stakes testing. They're just informal. And some of them have been normed, but they're not, kind of scary, you know, end of grade test scores. So they may still give you some diagnostic information that helps you to figure out, oh, well, maybe this isn't primarily a comprehension issue. Although comprehension will always be something we need to keep working on it. Don't get me wrong. But when the foundation is cracked, you want to start there. Yeah, Samantha says it's about half of her 6th grade class. Well, you may be able to find some activities that I mentioned at the end that you can do maybe for a 5-minute warm-up. It's great for spelling. Okay, so this is where I want to direct your attention. I have this blog post, and you can find lots of resources there for free about this nonsense word reading test. I have a couple different options. I also created an informal reading nonsense word measure and some other measures that help you kind of examine different aspects of decoding, like a phonics measure, a nonsense word reading measure, phonemic awareness measures. And when I say informal, that means I don't have norms for that test, but it still gives you information, especially when you compare them to your whole class. But you also can really be benefited by having nationally normed or somewhat normed data. So there's one test there that's that you can see in the first section of that blog post that I'd recommend you would use from Dyslexia International. I believe there's a link to that test. It's not it's not normed on a very large sample at all, but still it's approximate. It gives you something to draw from. Do you give a nonsense word list before the Dibbles test? Oh, cool, that's interesting. So the Dibbles is very helpful, but the nonsense word test only does, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it only does 3 sound words. So some kids can manage to blend 3 sounds and still not be able to blend more complex words or syllables, and also they may not know how to cope with the advanced phonics, like that O can be O, O-A, O-W, O-E, O, silent E. And so that is kind of a lower boundary on something that goes a lot higher. So the Dibbles can be helpful but insufficient, particularly as kids move up into late 1st grade, 2nd, and 3rd. Is kindergarten too young to administer this too? Well, I've got a range of them, so you can check them out, Donnie, and see. The Reading Simplified test that I created can be used with kindergartners. What you do is you just stop after they start to get 2 or 3 or 4 wrong, so they won't get too frustrated. So I really want to encourage you to think about that nonsense word reading test. That's the big aha, the big secret that I'm here today to tell you about, because it is so rarely used and it points so frequently to the source of the real problem. There are other issues that need to be developed, other skills that need to be developed, but first start with the foundation. That's what's got to be fixed first. So, but there's 2 other things that you can test really quickly that you also may not have access to, so I just wanted to mention them. Also, these are on the blog post. So just a simple word identification test can be very helpful, and there is a free one that's also listed at that same website. This is the same website blog post that I've been mentioning. So I've got lots of resources there for you. So if you have a comprehension test, that's how the student puts everything together. But word identification is just one component that leads to comprehension. But if we don't know what that is, then we don't really know, something vital. So word identification builds on top of nonsense or sound-based decoding, which is what the nonsense word test reveals. So sometimes it's also very helpful to give that word identification test a list of just real words and see how they score as compared to other kids. And then if that's weak, then you need to give them lots of reading practice. If the sound symbol decoding is weak, then work on the sound symbol decoding, and I'll share in just a few seconds how to do that. And then after they build up their sound symbol decoding, then you have to just read a lot, and mainly read widely and reread to build up your word identification. And then comprehension and fluency will build upon that. And then similarly, you probably have some kind of access to fluency, but if you don't, look into these resources, and there's also some national norms on that blog post that can be helpful. So those are 3 things that can help you: nonsense word reading tests, word identification tests, and fluency. Those are more specific, looking at the sub-processes that undergird what a good comprehender needs. So if you have just that global outcome-based kind of measure, these 3 will help fill in the gaps and help you figure out what's really the source of the problem. And generally, 99% of the time, truly, that's what I find when I have kids come to me who have been identified as being behind or not reaching their potential. Like that 4th grade girl, she certainly wasn't behind, but there was some frustration going on with the teacher and with the mother and the child. There's 99% of the time, from my experience, there's a word attack problem. So do that nonsense word test first, because it will really surprise you. Donnie, the one you're asking about, which month for kindergarten, the informal reading test that I created that's listed here, that you can download, that can be done in September. And maybe in a month or 2 after that. So you might be saying, okay, great. What if my student does have a sound-based reading problem? Then what do I do? Because, if you're like me, when I was trained with a master's, I had courses in reading. I did not know how to teach kids how to read the words. Well, that's the mission of Reading Simplified. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time teaching that now, but I want you to know where to go to look for resources. So let's see if I can get to the right spot. So what I provide at Reading Simplified is really a streamlined version of how to teach reading. And there's just 3 main activities: switch it, read it, and sort it, that solve most of the decoding problems. And that kind of may blow your mind, but it's true. Because each activity does multiple sub-processes simultaneously, and it really addresses how sounds and symbols match. And so kids can break the code really quickly. You learn how to do those 3 activities, and then you have them read new text and reread the same text to build up their word identification. And that's about all that it takes to figure out how to teach them to be better sound symbol decoders. It can take several weeks or a couple of months, but it doesn't take 2 or 3 years. Which tests on the blog are aimed at middle school? Aubrey asks. Most of them are applicable to all ages. The ones that I was mentioning, all the nonsense words reading measures can work for middle schoolers. So if you want to know about those 3 activities, this is a very, very comprehensive post that will tell you about how to do those 3 activities. Lots of free information, videos, and free downloads so that you can help kids when you find that problem. Okay, so I don't want to leave you identifying a problem but not knowing what to do with it. Okay, so please consider going there. And it's not something you can just pick up in 5 minutes, but it is a plan, a step-by-step plan for addressing this problem when you encounter it with your students or with groups of students. And if you want me to guide you along that way, I also want you to know that I do have a membership, the Reading Simplified Academy. That's a place where you learn how to put this system together. You have the resources like student materials, student texts, student word lists to be able to do it. And also I'm there to help you in a discussion forum. So that's also an option. You have this freely available blog post and with lots of information about how to solve that problem, but also I offer a full professional development opportunity with the Reading Simplified Academy. Great, Aubrey. So if you are curious to know more about that, you can go to readingsimplified.com, and right there you'll find a button to click on the Reading Simplified Academy and see what's all is in there. So let's see if I can move forward. I'm wrapping up now for our 4th night of ELA Live. Don't forget, if you want to find out what's coming for the next few nights, 11 more nights, go to this website, readingsimplified.com, 15-nights-pd-via-Facebook, and you'll see what's coming up. We've got how to teach students to elaborate on their thinking with English Oh My tomorrow, and on Sunday, how to run a book club with the Reading and Writing Haven. So, and then several more great topics that I'm excited to be a part of. And Donnie asks, is the Academy Professional Development credit? You do get a certificate when you finish the coursework. Let me show you that. Right here, you can see this is a list of like the course. You go through a video course to learn how to do switch it, to learn how to do read it, to learn how to do sort it. When you finish it, you do get a certificate that your district or school might be willing to accept for CEU credits. So I'm here now for questions. If you have any follow-up questions about how to assess reading problems or then what to do when you got them, I'm here. And otherwise, I'll just say thanks for joining us. I'll stay on for a minute or two to see what kinds of questions you have, but that's my content for tonight. I really appreciate all of you who participated, and I hope it was useful. Come back to the other presenters in the next few nights for ELA Live. So what questions do you have for those of you who are still here? Thank you, guys. I appreciate the hearts and the love and the thumbs up. That's really great. You know, if you have a question, it takes a while to type, so that's hard. You know, when I was teaching middle school originally, I didn't have, like I said, I didn't know which reading level my kids were. So I did informal reading levels on every student, like 80 or 85 kids myself. I just pulled them off to the side while I had other people reading on their own with their own book. I just pulled them off to the side. And I found out that my 6th grade level readers were on average reading at the 4th grade reading level. And that's kind of what sent me on this path to figuring out what is the best way to teach reading. Because I didn't know. I had a master's in secondary English and I was perplexed, but I didn't know how to do it. And they had this gap and I didn't know. I knew actually the problem was the way they were attacking words because I could tell that they did not have good skills, but I didn't know what to do to move them from the 4th grade to the 6th grade. So that is what kind of got me to pursue this question in depth. I spent hours in the university library and online. It was hard to kind of find stuff online then. That was back in the, the old ages. Some of you might not remember it. Internet old ages, dinosaur era. And, but finally found some things that have made a huge difference for me and for other teachers I've been working with. So Donnie says, with K, how do you know how to administer the word attack nonsense word test, or are they just too much at the beginning level? Okay, is it too soon? Well, I would want to know with my kindergartners, at least can they recognize letter sounds? Do they recognize to say the letter sound, not the name? Because the sounds are going to really help them decode. And then I might just give them, a 3-sound nonsense word to see what their approach is, or I could give them a real word. The thing is, the reason I like to do it fairly early is that some kids can memorize literally hundreds of words with mostly a visual only strategy. And so you don't know, are they actually attacking words with a sound symbol basis, or are they just such great memorizers of a visual pattern? So that's why that can sometimes help. And I can sense that you're concerned about doing something too early, but if it's an informal test and you just put out in front of them 2 or 3 nonsense words and they don't do it, then usually most kids aren't too frustrated by it and it's no big deal. And you say, oh, good try. This is really hard 1st grade stuff and it's no big deal. But then if they do know how to blend it, that's good. They're they're on their way. And if they can't, then you need to keep an eye out on them. Can they blend sounds together? So definitely trust your judgment, but also keep in mind an informal test doesn't necessarily have to be a very scary thing and can be cut off and not fully administered. So you kind of use your judgment based on each child. So Aaron said, the students you tutored for the case studies, were you tutoring once a week? Yes, once a week. Oh, actually, most of those were every other week for an hour, but they did get some homework about, like 4 or 5 worksheets to do that may have taken them at the most 30 minutes across the course of 2 weeks, but then nightly reading. So it's definitely, they do need to practice reading and getting feedback from someone. So it's not just that they got 6 hours or 7 hours of instruction. They also did some reading practice, but As far as the teacher's time, it was only that amount of time. And those students happen to be every other week just because of my schedule, their schedule, and vacations and whatnot. But I do often meet for once in my tutoring setting for 1 hour a week and then ask the parents to help support them with the reading across the course of the week. And then Aubrey says, when you work with kids on this problem, they generally only need like 5 to 10 hours of practice. Across all the students I have, I found that it's about 12 hours to get to grade level or beyond. I really want their word attack to be above grade level, and that's what I typically find. And then through reading practice, their word identification creeps closer to grade level and then moves beyond later. But they shore up with the tutoring at the sound symbol decoding level. They shore up that foundation. Then they practice reading a lot, and they get to grade level and beyond. So yeah, some kids can jump to grade level in 6 hours, but then there are some that take 24 or 36 when they have some severe difficulties. But whatever I find, it's a lot faster than traditional phonics instruction because the sound symbol processing is integrated in all the activities. And Donnie says, I have heard in foundations. Yes, I'm aware of that. There are some interesting similarities between some of the activities I teach and that. And Aubrey says, if this is an issue, how would you bring it up with a parent that they need extra tutoring? Oh, that is tricky. I'll have to think about that one. That's kind of, I would definitely check with your peers and your principal about the right way to approach that for your particular community. And then also see what kinds of resources the school may have. If you've uncovered some things, particularly if it's a big gap, then they should be tested for some special education resources. Maybe they have a learning disability, or maybe they have dyslexia or something that can be identified so they would get extra help officially. But if not, then there's a lot that you can do in small pockets here and there because these activities are highly efficient. So that is a tricky one. Aaron asks just how spaced out the instruction was with each. Okay. Yes, I know it's really hard if you don't have the nightly reading, but if you're in the classroom setting, obviously these are, kids with lots of opportunities because the parents are there to pay for the tutoring, and then they're also there to ensure that the tutoring benefits the kid across the course of the week. But in the context, on the other hand, I'm only seeing them for 1 hour. So when you have kids every day, you could work with them for 20 minutes or 30 minutes in a small group and then ensure that they go somewhere when you work with your next group and get the reading practice that they need. Maybe they can be listening and following along. Maybe they can be paired with a stronger reader, or maybe they can be paired with a teaching assistant or a volunteer. Maybe there's a computerized reading software, or any kind of listening along opportunity can help build that reading practice in where you're there to oversee it. And then what I like to do is I say, we read a new text, say Monday, and I'm saying, okay, go practice that. I expect you to be really good at it by tomorrow. And if a kid's really, really struggling, then I'll make the text really short so that they can actually master it. So the next day, Tuesday, when I see them again, okay, let's see how you're doing on that text. So even if you can't be there with them hovering over them, checking every word, there are resources for them to get the reading practice that they need when they're not working with you. So it is a very challenging thing, but that's kind of how I would manage it. And Aaron, write to me if you don't have those kinds of resources. I can brainstorm with you about how to get access to professionally recorded things and stuff like that. Yeah, and you're right. Thank you, Aaron, for explaining what you can't tell the parents their child needs tutoring. You can report their current levels. Very good. And yeah, if you have RTI, then this can fold into that. But if you don't have that kind of framework, each school and frankly each state has different frameworks on how they can, how you're supposed to identify kids with special needs or just any kind of need. So it is a tricky thing for me to say about what will work for everyone. So that's great. Okay, are there any other questions? I see we might be slowing down. Michelle said, thank you for the information. You're welcome. I'm so glad that you guys were here. I'm so glad it was interactive so that I could get closer to what maybe you needed. But I think I might just sign off now so that I don't hold you too long. Thank you so much. Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Aubrey, for that dialogue. That's super. I look forward to the next night of ELA Live, and stay tuned on this Facebook page and like it, and follow us so that you can get other professional development. Usually what I do when I go on Facebook Live is actually have a student with me, and I teach the activity, switch it, sort it, and read it with that student so you can learn while I teach. So that's something to look for on my page if you're curious about how to solve these sound-based decoding problems really quickly. Okay, thanks, you guys. See you soon at the next ELA Live.